when Queen's audience revolted. Queen's music has rocked fans all around the world for decades. Their grand choruses, lavish instrumentation, and killer stage shows made for electronic concerts that were some of the best the world has ever seen. But the Rock and Roll Hall of Famers had their fair share of duds, too. From albums that nearly cost the band their career to battles with the public over Freddie Mercury's sexuality, Queen was no stranger to controversy. But few instances in Queen's career can match the infamy of their Latin America tour. What happened to their visit to Puebla that made fans and audience-goers alike revolt against the beloved group? Queen got their start in Britain, so their foray into English-speaking foreign countries like America and Canada made a lot of sense for the band. At the same time, they had a growing fan base in Latin America too. But the late 1900s was a difficult time for many, and Latin America countries were going through a particularly difficult time. This meant that Queen couldn't freely tour there like they could everywhere else in the world. So when it finally came time for the band to go live in Latin America, the band was just as hyped as the fans were. It seemed like a dream come true for everyone involved, but that's not exactly how things turned out. At the time, many countries in Latin America were facing oppressive control by militant regimes and even dictatorships. These strict governments led to economic disparity and a slew of social outcries and general unrest. Songs like Another One Bites the Dust and Crazy Little Thing Called Love were all the rage back then, and they inspired Latin America audiences. So, Queen eventually made it to the region in 1981, and this would be their first and only tour of Latin America. The tour began on February 28th, with back-to-back concerts at Estadio Vélez Sarsfield in Buenos Aires, where Queen managed to draw a crowd of over 300,000 people. At the time, it was the largest concert in Argentina history. But those stats don't tell the full story. Queen performed these concerts during what was known as Argentina's Dirty War, so life was hard there. But this debut concert would signal what was to come at the end of their tour at Puebla. At the time, concert halls and stadiums were used as makeshift prisons. Moats were dug around them, and walls were built to prevent people from escaping. While Queen knew of the dire situation and even brought their own artificial turf to cover the ground to make the places more habitable, everyone there knew the horrors of what was going on just days earlier and would probably continue after the venue moved on. It wasn't easy for the band to score the shows in Argentina either, as Freddie and the crew faced an uphill battle to convince the military-led country who feared a gathering of young people could spell disaster for their regime. To quell ideas of resistance, the Argentina government sent armed guards to escort the band when they arrived, and it's rumored they used covert agents to keep tabs on the band during their stay. Queen later went on to play in Brazil, at Estadio do Morumbi in Sao Paulo. It's hard to believe Queen's tour could take a downturn after their Brazil show. Here the band had one of their most moving moments throughout their entire career, maybe only second to their Live Aid show.
To use our ears, our music changes through the years.
During their Brazil show, practically all 130,000 attendees sang along to Love of My Life. This heartfelt moment helped put Brazil on the map for other bands who would later set tour dates in South America. And of course, we know Brazil today as one of the staples for bands on tour, and it's known for some of the craziest concerts around. So you can definitely thank Queen for helping to shed some light on the awesome culture of Brazil. While this series of concerts was Queen's only full-fledged tour of Latin America, Brazil left such a positive impact on the band that they would later return to Brazil one more time back in 1985 for the Rock the Rio Festival. Things got abnormal once more when they went to Venezuela. Queen had originally planned for 3 shows in the city of Caracas, but only got to play one because shortly after they arrived, the country went into a state of national mourning out of respect for the former president, Romulo Betancourt, who had just passed away. Then came their Mexico shows. So what happened during their Mexico shows that could have been worse than the conditions in Argentina? Well, their first show in Monterrey was shaky but not terrible. Queen performed in Monterrey, colloquially named Sultana del Norte, on October 9, 1981, at their university stadium. One minor incident occurred when a ramp fell and caused minor injuries to some fans, but then came their 2 shows in Puebla, where things got a bit more dicey. The band also planned shows at Guadalajara and Mexico City, but they had to cut these venues following the incidents at Puebla. Much like Argentina, this was a time when Mexico wasn't doing the best politically, economically, or socially. The infrastructure was failing in many areas, with buildings either being unsafe to use or too torn up for proper security for concerts. Like Argentina, the Mexican government also acted as a roadblock for the band, and the poor economic climate of Mexico also meant that most bands simply couldn't justify bringing their act to there. Queen went against the grain, but it didn't exactly pay off for them. In Puebla, the band took to the Ignacio Zaragoza Olympic Stadium. Here, fans were a bit less loving than Queen's Brazilian crowd. Attendees were openly drinking and abusing substances, which is often a recipe for disaster. These rowdy crowds had attitudes that clashed with legit fans who traveled from around the country to see Queen. Ultimately, this meant the actual fans got upset because they had to deal with belligerent people all around them, and the drunken people were already in the mood to cause trouble, so both sides were already upset going into the show. Queen had no idea this sort of situation was brewing out in the audience, so what happened next is kind of obvious in hindsight. Fans aren't in agreement over the exact point in the show, but a certain incident happened either during their magnum opus Bohemian Rhapsody or their newly released hit Another One Bites the Dust. At some point during one of these songs, Mercury left the stage and returned with an oversized, if not giant, sombrero. By this point, Freddie was already well known for his outlandish attire. He was all about that glam rock lifestyle, so a larger-than-life sombrero was just his crazy take on the traditional Mexican attire. He had just hoped it would be a prop that would connect with fans. The sombrero was a big reveal during an already climactic moment of one of their biggest songs, meant to hype the crowd up even more, but that's not exactly how things went down. The rowdy crowd didn't take kindly to the gesture. Offended, a group in the crowd began to whistle and throw their shoes. Things quickly escalated when others throwing socks full of dirt and even bottles at the band. In spite of the actual assault on the band, they didn't stop playing. After the crowd began throwing things at Queen, some attendees recount Mercury spitting water at people in the front rows, which further annoyed the crowd, which further incited their anger. The thing is, Mercury was known for this act as just one of his quirks. Of course, he probably could have read the room a little better and maybe skipped that part of his presentation because it clearly didn't help the situation. This situation is a great reminder of how important it is to consider the cultural implications of our actions. Freddie's gesture clearly wasn't meant to poke fun at their culture, but it's all about reading the crowd. Mexico was in some of the worst conditions out of all Latin America countries at the time. Their citizens were ravaged by violence and poverty-stricken. The last thing they wanted to see was a foreign, rich man appropriating their culture without regard to the suffering they've endured. However, the altercation wasn't exactly one-sided. When the situation was reaching a boiling point, Queen left the stage, but Freddie clapped back with a couple scathing lines. "Thank you very much, Puebla. Mexico, thank you for the shoes. Goodbye, friends, motherfuckers. Goodbye, you bunch of tacos." In a rare interview, Freddie's personal assistant, Peter Phoebe Freestone, recalled the Puebla revolt, saying, "From my memory, it went something like this. As the audience were being let into the stadium, the police searched everybody looking for recording equipment. They found, rather than confiscating the whole thing, the police removed the batteries and let the fan keep the recorder. The problem arose when police on the inside of the venue were then selling the batteries back to the fans. Obviously, the fans weren't happy about this, and some thought the band were getting some of this money and started throwing things at the stage. I still have one of the bolts that nearly hit Freddie. There is a photo on the internet with Freddie and Roger holding it. Things were chaotic all across the board. Even outside the arena, there were reports of looting. People broke into the concert to see the show for free, and the list goes on. International venues of this caliber were new to Mexican businesses, and the event organizers were unprepared and ill-equipped to handle such a crazy situation. Despite the mark against Queen's amazing legacy and all the problems the venue caused, their show was still considered one of the most important concerts in Mexican history. Some say the impact of this show helped turn Mexican venues into one of the biggest music markets in all of Latin America. So, while Queen didn't have a warm welcome at Puebla, they still managed to help the Mexican music industry with their unceasing sensationalism. That's the story of the time Queen's audience revolted against them. What would you have done if you were there that day in Puebla? Do you think Mercury went too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, remember to click that like button and subscribe for all the best music content on YouTube.